I'm Mark. I'm a history teacher, and I'm going rogue. It's summertime. I've got a couple of months, so it's time to go rogue again. Those of you that have followed me, thank you very much. You know that I've kind of an aficionado of the nuclear war genre of movies. Of my top 10 videos all time, 5 of them have something to do with nuclear war. Today, we're going to look at another post-apocalyptic film. Based on the 1957 book by Nevil Shute, it's the 1959 version of On the Beach. In the next episode, we'll look at the remake, made in 2000. We're going rogue. Nevil Shute was an English-born author. He was an aeronautical engineer and a pilot during the 1920s and worked on weapons development during World War II. He wrote novels as a side hustle at the time. He moved to Australia in 1950, like 2 million other Europeans after World War II, settling in Melbourne and writing the novel On the Beach in 1957. The phrase, on the beach, is Royal Navy speak for going into retirement. On the Beach focuses on the city of Melbourne, Australia, following World War III's massive nuclear exchange. Melbourne is the world's southernmost major city, and because the war is a northern hemisphere phenomenon, the city is relatively unscathed. And with the exception of fuel being in short supply, the people go about their normal lives. Little has changed in the wake of the war. People still go to work, they go to bars after work, the phones still work, trains still run, but radiation in the northern hemisphere is making its way to the south. Some physicists say that the equatorial winds might be a barricade against the radiation making its way to Australia. It might stop the radiation from moving into the southern hemisphere. Others suggest that there's a chance of human survival far to the north in the polar latitudes in Alaska. Captain Dwight Towers is the commander of the U.S. naval submarine USS Scorpion. His boat is undamaged during the war, and he navigates to Melbourne, and he places his vessel under Australian command. Towers is ordered by the new Australian commanders to take his submarine, the Scorpion, to investigate radiation levels around Australia. He finds that radiation levels have already reached northern Australia, and those populations have already been killed. He's then ordered to take his boat to Alaska and find out if the physicists are right, if the radiation levels are dropping in the far northern hemisphere, and if people can be moved up to Alaska. Hope is further buoyed when a message is received in Melbourne via Morse code from somewhere in the area of Seattle. Physicist Julian Osborne is assigned to the Scorpion, along with Australian Naval Lieutenant Peter Holmes. While the ship is being prepared, Lieutenant Holmes invites Towers to dinner at his home where he meets Holmes' wife Mary and Mary's sister, Moira Davidson, who falls in love with Towers. The skipper does not return her affections. As long as there's a chance that his family has survived back in the United States, he remains loyal to his wife. He makes it clear to Moira that he knows his family is almost certainly dead. Towers takes the Scorpion off the shore of Alaska and finds that radiation levels are not falling. On the return, the Scorpion drops into Puget Sound. The executive officer of the boat goes ashore and finds that the source of the Morse code is a broken window cord that is blowing in the breeze and tapping randomly on a telegraph. One of the crew is from the area. He jumps ship and swims ashore. He tells Towers that if he's going to die, he wants to die in his hometown. Steering into San Francisco Bay, the Scorpion finds the city entirely destroyed, and the Golden Gate Bridge has collapsed. The Scorpion then returns to Melbourne, and the characters live out the last few days of their lives. The Australian government has begun passing out suicide pills so that the residents are not subject to the horrors of radiation sickness. Julian Osborne takes his pills while sitting in his beloved Ferrari race car. When Mary becomes sick, Peter gives a lethal injection to their daughter and then joins his wife in taking their suicide pill so they can die together as a family. Towers joins his crew so they can scuttle the Scorpion in the open seas. Moira watches the ship leave port from a bluff above the channel before taking her pills, imagining life with Towers as she dies. In 1959, producer Stanley Kramer turned the story into a motion picture for United Artists. The leading role of Commander Dwight Towers is played by Gregory Peck, Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird. Ava Gardner played the role of Moira Dickinson. It is reported that Ava Gardner called Melbourne the perfect place to make a film about the end of the world. I'm not sure how to take that. I'm not sure how I would take that if I was a Melburnian. Fred Astaire plays Julian Osborne, a government physicist who is tracking the coming radiation. The role of Lieutenant Peter Holmes is played by the not-so-psycho Anthony Perkins. He would play his iconic role of Norman Bates the next year in 1960. The film version makes a few changes to the book. The submarine in the film is the USS Sawfish. Sawfish? Why? The message in Morse code is coming from San Diego. The telegraph being activated by a Coke bottle, which is caught in the drawstring of a window shade that's being blown by the wind. When Towers steers the Sawfish into San Francisco Bay, the city is completely intact, but totally empty. Swain, the crewman that left the sub, is last seen fishing in a boat in the bay. After returning to Melbourne, Towers becomes more romantically involved with Moira. Julian enters his Ferrari race car in the Australian Grand Prix. He wins the race, while many of the drivers crash inexplicably. The Salvation Army holds a prayer meeting under a banner reading, "There is still time, brother." Sensing their death upon them, the characters decide to die near what they value most. Julian Osborne seals up his garage and starts his Ferrari and dies of carbon monoxide poisoning. Peter and Mary Holmes take their government-issued suicide pills and die alongside their infant daughter as a family. The crew of the Sawfish decide that they want to return to the United States to die rather than dying in Melbourne. Towers takes command of the submarine one more time, and the movie ends with the ship leaving the harbor at Melbourne. Moira stoically watches the Sawfish head out to sea while Towers looks her direction, then heads down below deck. The Sawfish submerges, and Moira is left to die alone. All right, so let's go to the history. On the Beach opened in cities on 6 different continents in 1959. Beyond the standard Hollywood and New York premieres, a London premiere was attended by the Soviet ambassador. A premiere in Tokyo was attended by the Japanese imperial family. And a screening occurred at the Little America base in Antarctica. A special premiere was arranged in Moscow, which was attended by Gregory Peck and his wife with 1,200 other Soviet dignitaries. United Artists thought that the film might play a significant role in changing the trajectory of the Cold War. Instead, it was a box office wash. Filmed at a cost of $2.9 million, the film ended up losing $700,000. In the 1957 book, the war begins when Albania launches nukes against Italy. Albania? It then escalates with an Egyptian attack on Britain and the United States. NATO then launches against Russia. Nuclear weapons have proliferated to the point where even Albania and Egypt have nukes. In reality, nuclear technology was proliferating very slowly in the 1950s. Great Britain became the third country to obtain a nuclear weapon in 1952. Oddly enough, the site of Britain's first nuclear test was the Montebello Islands off of the northwest coast of Australia. Britain tested 2 more bombs on that site in 1956. The second of these tests, codenamed Mosaic G2, was the largest nuclear explosion in Australia and was described as being exceptionally dirty, with fallout reaching large swaths of mainland Australia, as far away as Queensland, 1,000 miles to the east. Tests were also done at Emu Field and Maralinga in the deserts of southern Australia in 1956 and 1957. In the 1959 film, the nuclear exchange occurs, but no one is assigned blame. When asked by the crew of the Sawfish who started the war, Julian Osborne blames Albert Einstein. In his mind, the country that fired first is irrelevant, when the entire world is on its way to dying a slow death. So, On the Beach, the 1959 version, black and white. Did you see it? I mean, maybe not in 1959, but we'll come back to this with the 2000 version of the same film. What came up to date and what went wrong. Hey, thanks for coming by. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. If I did it right, you did both. I had fun, but I don't quit my day job, and sorry it took so long to get another video out. No summer school this year, so be looking forward to a few more videos. Keep an eye out. Look for me. I'm Mark Haggard. I'm a history teacher, and I've gone rogue.